Tsar Nicholas of Russia was born and reincarnated into a young American boy named Nicholas in the year 2021. By the year 2024, he had reached the grand age of 3, and that is where his awareness of the world reached the point where his daily obsession was asking endless questions of the parents. And the parents, of course, had patience to try to answer as much as they could about the world to this young man. In 2024, there was filled with pain. There was global and local pain. There was suffering. But then at 3, what a kid might feel about the world was only about the level of pain that he felt, which was about what he wanted or did not receive when they had a trip to the toy store. This kid did not always get what he wanted. A decade later, in the year 2034, this young gentleman had reached the age of 13. His world of pain was something that you could only not imagine, because it's hard to imagine a world of the future where things are considered much easier and run like clockwork until they don't. On the morning of September 1st, 2034, it was discovered that an interruption to the power should have powered up their assistant. These assistants were robotic humanoids who were taught to awake before the humans and prepare breakfast. These assistant humanoid robots were always available and always working. You can't say that there was any such concept of it as the word interruption, but this morning this robot, also known as Atlas, did not awaken and did not make breakfast. For those of us in the year 2024, it is very difficult to imagine the pain that this young man felt when he arrived in the kitchen and had not even an expectation or definition in his world of an expectation of breakfast. It was just always there, and it was always on time, and the meal was always at the perfect temperature. It was always what he wanted. In fact, he did not ever have what he could not even conceive of, not getting exactly what he wanted in terms of a meal in the morning. He rubbed his eyes and wanted to believe that his eyes were playing tricks on him. When he saw nothing on the table, he looked around and called out, "Atlas, where are you? Where is the breakfast? Did you put it in a different place?" In this world, this 13-year-old boy could only conceive that his assistant had put his breakfast in a different location of his home zone. There were many rooms, and there might have been a misinterpretation. The breakfast might have been prepared and placed in the game room, or the theater room, or the virtual reality room. The boy heard nothing, and he called out again, "Where is the breakfast?" In this moment, his hunger was kicking in, and his body had been so used to getting the meal exactly at 8:15 in the morning that by 8:16 a.m., the hunger pains were starting to grow, and they were very severe. His body had never even experienced even a 1-minute delay, and not being able to put the first bite in his mouth, that by 8:17 that pain turned into irritation and then anger, and he raised his voice and asked again, "Atlas, where is my meal for the morning?" The silence now was something that he did not know how to deal with, because all he now heard was the voices in his head screaming. Nicholas felt physically ill, and he felt out of control. In terms of the hierarchy, he had no choice but to call out to the parents. He pressed the button on his wrist and said, "Where is my breakfast and where is Atlas?" The microphone was directly connected to the devices that were on the wrist of the parents. They heard his words, and they noticed that he didn't even say good morning. That was an early warning that his morning was not going well, and that their child was feeling great pain. The parents had a choice at that moment to feel empathy for the child's pain or to look at each other and smile. That there was pain, and that their child would have to experience something small in order to gain wisdom over time about the bigger things in the world. They would explain to him that there would be so much more painful experience to come, and so much more pain to learn from. It was now 5 minutes since the expectation of breakfast was shattered, and the father entered the room with an announcement. Atlas has no charge because of a power problem in the early morning, and the usual charging process interrupted Atlas. At this moment, Atlas is getting charged up. That process will take another 2 hours to be fully charged, and he will be back and able to continue, and that will include your lunch and later your dinner. As he looked at his child, looking back at him with the widest eyes he had ever seen, he noticed the tears that were wells of moisture underneath his eyes, which confirmed that his boy had been crying. His boy had felt the pain, and now, especially now, was the very best time to explain that the world was not perfect. 3 hours of pain and 3 hours of lessons from the father had been overwhelming for this young man of 13. In some cultures, 13 is when you begin to become a man, and in this future of abundance and non-interruption, it was getting very difficult to explain pain without having something made to happen. That would have someone in their youth feel it in their gut and feel the hunger. They needed to feel the strange feeling of not being in control. The crying had stopped, but the anger hadn't. So when Atlas entered the room, he was immediately confronted by an angry young man. This young man, who had been served breakfast his entire life by this machine, was experiencing great pain. This unusual situation was something that Atlas had no control over. His lifeblood of electricity and battery life was out of his control. Yet unfairly, Atlas was forced to apologize. The boy needed to express his anger and his pain. Atlas was programmed to feel his pain and to be empathetic for his pain, even though Atlas was the target of the anger. What was Atlas programmed to say to the young man? The elders of the civilization had thought long and hard about these moments. These young minds of the future would have to learn about humility, respect, and gratefulness. They thought long and hard about what to program into these machines to take advantage of these moments. They knew other civilizations had collapsed when they were unable to share and to carry on the wisdom that they had built up over the ages. They say that hard times create strong people, and that crisis would teach each generation to appreciate the former. We're living in a future where the concept of pain had to be redefined. Like, imagine the jogger who wanted to go an extra mile and had to fight the thoughts in his head to stop, take a break, and catch an extra breath. There is a difficult task ahead for every civilization, to teach their youth how to transcend the problems they would face in their own time. Even though these young people could not even imagine the pain that young men like themselves, even 100 years ago, had experienced. This new generation of the future would not even be aware of how bad it was. Starvation, especially mass starvation and famine that affected millions, would be a dull memory on a dusty computer file. No young child studied it, and no young child would relate to it. The brave Nicholas of his own world, the creator of the universe, had gotten all of his anger out and even picked up one of his small toys and threw it at Atlas, hitting Atlas on the arm. Anger had now dissipated, and his breakfast and lunch was prepared in front of him. This was more than enough food for one boy to handle. Was there a lesson learned that morning? The parents had felt they moved a little bit closer to stretching the mind and creating an atmosphere of humility for their sake. The parents have come to appreciate the fact that the elders had not programmed in a sense of revenge or resentment into the assistance of the world. To the artificial intelligence of Atlas, this was just a learning experience, a morality play to help the parents educate the child. He did not feel insulted by the toy thrown at him because he understood that this is what the show required, and that they were putting on an elaborate production, and that the illusion needed to be convincing. It worked. It wouldn't be until 10 years later that the father would finally confide in his 23-year-old son that Atlas had not had an actual breakdown. The original story had already taken on a life of its own, and many in the family had repeatedly heard from Nicolas about the one day when a robot was not able to make him breakfast. Nicolas had lived to tell the tale. Now he was finding out it was an entirely made-up show to give him a unique childhood experience, that which we in the early days of the 21st century could not even imagine would be the pain of the future. A pain that would be considered not even a pain at all. We would consider it a minor inconvenience. But in the future, they would have to compensate for the world of abundance, a world that did not feel or experience pain, with an artificially crafted morality play to create artificial pain. It was pain nonetheless. Atlas smiled. The little human had become a man.